Good morning from Hopalong Hollow. This is Jeri, and today we're going to revisit this potager that we have been working on since the beginning of the year. It's changed quite a bit, and to reiterate, the reason for that is because I had to put a fence up. So let's take a look at how this was done, and maybe you'll get some ideas for your own garden. Well, it looks like we've come full circle from early February when I first did the video making a potager the Hopalong Hollow Way, Part 1. And as you recall at the time, I mentioned that when you plot out your first garden plan, you should put it in a place where you'll be able to expand in several different directions if you have to expand your garden. And little did I know at the time that I'd be practicing what I preach, because instead of my garden turning into the lovely little patch that I envisioned, such as this, or this, my peacocks, there's one of my lovely peacocks right there, my lovely peacocks decided in early June to turn my young crop into their own personal farmer's market, and they proceeded to devour the chard, the young pepper plants, the tomato plants, the watermelons, leaves, the nasturtiums, I mean everything that I had growing at the time, which had been, quite a labor of love. But the reason they were able to do that is because my garden was an open garden without any barriers or fencing around it. Simply because in the past, I never had to do that. This just turned out to be three peacock brothers who really, really, really love veggies. So I came to the conclusion that we would have to put up a fence in that garden in order to protect it in the future. And in doing so, this has really changed the entire appearance of this garden. So I want to show you what was done and how you can do it if the need arises. So this garden plan, this was the first one, had to be revised in order to accommodate a picket fence, and we wanted to expand the garden out by about 2.5 feet all the way around in order to provide for that fence, and we knew that this would make it a much more enclosed looking area, and so we did want to expand it quite a bit. A few other things that really had to be changed. The porch was a jumping off area for the peacocks to go right into the garden, so this has to be completely closed off in some manner. Therefore, I lost my little walkway, which went right off the porch. It was very inconvenient because this is my potting area, but I was able to walk right off the porch, go down this little walkway to another pathway which led to the back courtyard. Well, this is going to be completely closed off with fencing. This is going to be completely closed off with a trellis of some sort. And therefore I've lost 2 of my walkways. No problem, we're going to find them in some other way. So my revised version brings the garden out 2.5 feet all the way around with the picket fence. The entire walkway had to be moved over this way to the other side of the fence. My first entryway is right here, which is almost right off the porch, because here's the porch, and here is the first walkway, and the second entryway is right over here in the corner. I'll show you this view from an upstairs window, and you'll get a much better feeling of how the garden changed from this to what it is today. So let's go. So as the garden is an extension of your house, and especially of your porch, if you're lucky enough to have one, we're going to start right off the porch and go into this area. And I'm going to show you right off the bat where one garden job often leads to another. So because I had to extend the garden out by 2.5 feet to accommodate the fence, I had to move this entire path outward. All the stones, all the bricks, everything had to come out and move over 2.5 feet, which was a job that took a few days. Now this garden bed is across from the potager on the other side of the sidewalk, and it only came out to where you see that fencing. But I had to bring the entire garden out like this and extend the garden in order to make this flow and give it some cohesion by making the stone wall directly across from where the picket fence begins. Just to reiterate what happened here, I used spindles from our old porch railing to create this picket fence. I cut the tops with a chop saw to make them nice and pointy, and that would be to discourage my birds from flying over the top or perching on top of that fence. And believe me, let's see, it's been up 2 weeks now. So far, so good. They just haven't done it. I've actually had this garden all to myself. So we've decided not to paint the posts, and the reason for that is that I am trying to break up the monotony of this long, white, straight section of picket fence, and also because I want these posts to age naturally, just as this fence across the way has done, giving it this beautiful old weathered, grayish, brownish look with a patina of moss on the surface of those pickets. And that's in keeping with this very imperfect look that we have here, the vintage look, the old-fashioned, old house and old garden look. I'm even looking forward to the years passing as this pretty much pristine white fence, because it was just newly painted, takes on some age as well and becomes far less than perfect, because around here we just like imperfectly perfect, and we don't want the landscaping look and we don't want the formal look, and that's pretty clear because you can see by my gardens that I am not looking for formality or anything pristine and perfect. Now, the clay pots are my choice for my finials. I choose clay pots because I love terracotta in the garden. It adds that beautiful little splash of color when you don't have any, but it also mimics all the bricks that we use around here, which you will see in the pathways everywhere. And as I've mentioned many times before, you do want to repeat a color, a pattern, and an element in your garden to keep it cohesive and to just keep the flow in your garden. Now, in order to keep these from falling or blowing over, they are simply put in with a, well, this one, most of them have a washer and a screw. I don't know why that one has some kind of little bracket. I must have run out of washers in this pot. And inserted inside our little clay pots. The succulents that are there right now are just so easy to care for. I really love succulents because they're carefree. They don't require a lot of fussiness. They don't require a lot of water. But I do believe that in the fall, these clay pots would be wonderful filled with hyacinth bulbs or tulip bulbs. And in the spring, maybe herbs, which will later be transplanted back into this garden. You know, another reason I love clay pots is because they just remind me of Peter Rabbit in Mr. McGregor's garden and that little clay pot full of geraniums. That's just one of my favorite illustrations in Beatrix Potter books. But also the stone, I gather the stone by the bucketful, by the creek bank, and if you have access to any kind of resource like this, or slate, or even oyster shells can be used if you live by the beach for a path. Whatever's natural in your area, so you are extending the look of your natural landscape in your garden. But the flagstones were just taken from another pathway. Here's one of the gates. This is the main gate. And this gate is sort of catty-cornered. And because we ran out of pickets, we didn't have enough pickets to make a gate. We had to make do with what we had. And what we had was this section of cast iron fencing. It was an antique old piece of fence I picked up at an antique show once long ago. I've used it many places in the garden, but this was the perfect place for it, its final home. So my husband James cut the gate into two pieces. This is the large piece for the larger gate. And then I had all these wonderful little metal bird silhouettes. I've had these around the property, on this gate, that gate, this fence, another fence, but I think they finally found the perfect resting spot. I used J&B molding, or welding, which is just a really strong epoxy, to attach them permanently to this gate. And now I think we have what is really a pretty simple and yet pretty special gate. And it looks wonderful with the pickets. And it looks really good with his old house. So on the other side of this gate, which is just great, it just swings open. I have something else that I used. I needed a gate stopper. And in my old tool graveyard, I found two old rakes. So this old rake makes a perfect stopper. My husband's going to put a magnet on that, so that one it'll stay closed. Now I thought for about 2 minutes about painting this gate, and then I said, now why would I do that? This is one of the elements in the garden. Rust. Rust, rust, rust. We have a lot of rust in here. We have this rusty old footboard from an antique bed, which we use for a trellis. We have that rusty old wheelbarrow. And over here on the other side, there's a little rusty windmill which has rudder beams and morning glories climbing up. And there's the headboard from that same antique bed. And various places throughout this garden are containing rusty things. So that's just one of the elements in this garden style. And this is where I've moved the bee house. Now this is like a brand new garden, because this section right here was pretty useless to me. It was, before we put up the fence, it was the outside of the garden. Everybody was always tromping through it. The plants were always getting smashed, and just nothing was doing very well at all, except for these little trees. But now I've been able to put the strawberries back in here from a tub, or a trough I should say. I'm going to try them again in the ground. They might do better next year. And then these are primroses that have been growing here for quite a long time. The beautiful little primroses you grow from seed. You just toss those in your garden. They are perennials, and they will come back year after year, and they're so beautiful. They're delicate little pink cups, and they bloom twice a year. In your garden, try to have a few little pockets for special things. So using the stone, I've separated a couple little pocket areas, and these are full of the herbs. This part of the garden is pretty much the same, except that the beds have been cleaned out and they're ready for maybe a fall crop, or maybe just wait to plant some bulbs in there in a couple months. And back here we have the little path that goes out and back to the porch entry. Now we're back to the other part of the metal gate, which is the very small entryway down here at the end of the pathway. But what I really want to show you is the gate weight. And I've been wanting to do one of these for a very long time. Our gate weight is a big old cast iron pot tied with a rope and then tied to an anchor, which in this case is just a metal pole with a bird on top. But these were used, usually they were like cannonball weights, which you would see in colonial Williamsburg. They've also been, people would use stones, they would just tie them to rocks. It was to keep the gates shut, the farm gates. But this one I've decided to use a cast iron pot, which I bought 5 years ago for this very purpose. I just didn't know what gate I would ever be able to use it on. So I've been saving it up for the perfect gate. And here's the perfect gate with its little rake stopper. Here we have the end of the line, and this is the other half of the metal fencing with little birds on it, and this is the other section of the garden. So this was the picket fence redo, and the solution to keeping the peacocks from going off the porch and into the garden was ever so simple. All this is that cattle panel with the pointy edges at the top. It's not very tall, but it doesn't matter. They will not challenge it. They haven't gone through it, they haven't gone over it, and it's going to be nice to use this if I want to plant anything, any kind of vines, like clematis vines, in these little garden beds below. So, this is the new potager, and I'm pretty happy with it. I hope you enjoyed this. From Hopalong Hollow, this is Jeri. We'll see you when it's time to plant bulbs.